There is something very strange about the inhabitants of Bikini Bottom that has been keeping me awake at night for a long time. We all know that Bikini Bottom is located in the Pacific Ocean, or at least now you do, since this town is inspired by Bikini Atoll, a place that exists in real life and that was a testing ground for US nuclear weapons during World War II and beyond. This is the basis for many theories that take this historical fact as the basis for why Bikini Bottom exists in the series and why its inhabitants are so strange. But beyond the characters, there is another curious element that is little talked about, and that is that it is not only the fish that behave strangely, the houses of the inhabitants themselves are very strange. Mr. Krabs lives in an anchor, Sandy has her own dome, SpongeBob lives in a pineapple under the sea that got there thanks to an artist whose hand slipped while he was painting, and Patrick's rock is not really a rock, since in season 12 it was revealed that it is the shell of a turtle named Tony, which has been asleep for more than 30 years, and during that time was covered by land, giving it that rocky appearance and almost leaving Patrick without a home. Yeah, I didn't know that either. But the strangest house of all is Squidward's. And I don't just mean that it's too fancy to belong to a failed musician with a job in the customer service industry. To some extent, we've seen Bikini Bottom homes have behaviors of their own, as if they were living entities as in Monster House. But on many of these occasions, there is an explanation. However, Squidward's house goes beyond a simple joke. The first time we saw it take on a life of its own was in the episode of The Secret Box, where Patrick assures us that no one can know the secret that the box hides, not even Squidward's house, and an instant later we see the house, alive, as if it were a real head bent down to take a look at the box for himself. This sounds like a simple running gag in the series, but it's strangely consistent, and it happens so many times that it starts to get pretty suspicious, so today we'll take a look at the mysterious mystery of why Squidward's house is alive. To solve this mystery, the first thing we need to do is find all the times Squidward's house has manifested some sign of life or consciousness in the series, because it will give us valuable context for what the freak is going on here. In the 4th season episode Funny Pants, Squidward tricks Bob. Well, already annoyed with listening to Bob laugh like crazy non-stop, he decides to invent a sickness related to a giggle box and tells Bob that if he laughs one more time, his giggle box will be permanently damaged and he will never be able to laugh again. This affects Bob so much that he actually loses his laughter and he breaks into an all-night cry and won't let Squidward rest. And the next morning, Squidward's house is so tired that he pulls a pair of hands out of the subfloor and covers his ears. Plus, he furrows his eyebrows, making an angry expression. Then, in the chapter Growth Spout, belonging to the 7th season, Pearl is having, well, a growth spurt. That is, she is growing rapidly, and as a consequence, she starts to feel very hungry. Mr. Krabs feeds her with everything he has available, but nothing calms Pearl's appetite, which leads Mr. Krabs to steal food from his friends, breaking into their houses to empty their refrigerators. When Mr. Krabs enters Squidward's house, he finds the kitchen fully stocked with food, taking out a huge haul, and after escaping, the house comes back to life, and this time he speaks, saying, "Well, I needed to lose a little weight anyway." As he speaks, the door tilts up and down, simulating the movement of a mouth. In season 8, in the episode A Friendly Game, we again see the house cover its ears for a second thanks to SpongeBob's house alarm, similar to the Funny Pants episode. Another episode where Squidward's house talks again is in There's a Sponge in My Soup. To tell the truth, this episode is really smoked since it belongs to season 11, and needless to say that here the series had several very experimental episodes. It happens that a bunch of hippies show up and invade the Krusty Krab because they need a warm place. And after several very weird events, at the end Krabs and Bob get rid of the hippies by sending them to Squidward's house, specifically to his bathtub. And upon perceiving the presence of these individuals, Squidward screams, as does his house, which shakes its head back, frowns more markedly than ever, and shouts, "Hippies!" But this time the door doesn't go down and up, but rather the wooden planks that make it up take the shape of a denture. In that same season, there is another episode called Bunny Hunt. The title is actually quite explanatory, since for some reason, a rabbit has gotten to the Bikini Bottom, specifically Bob's neighborhood, and ends up bothering Squidward to such an extent that he wants to get rid of it. On one of these occasions, Squidward's food starts to burn, and the house coughs as the smoke from the kitchen builds up, until it ends up smoking out the door and windows. These are all the references we have found to the house coming to life in the cartoon, although there is one more episode called Good Neighbors, which has a somewhat different reference. In Good Neighbors, Squidward installs a security system that makes the house turn into a kind of Evangelion-like mecha robot, but he is actually forcing it to transform, not like in the other episodes where its movements and transformations are natural. Plus, the reason it gets out of control and leaves the neighborhood to destroy all of Bikini's background is because Bob and Patrick spill cake on the security system console, causing a malfunction. The point here is that Squidward's house is another character in SpongeBob, not just a simple dwelling or ornament, but an authentic character like any other, except that it is a freaking house and should not be alive. Something curious about Squidward's house is that it is actually a moai, a typical statue of the island of Rapa Nui. It is believed that these statues were carved from volcanic rocks to represent the deceased ancestors of the Rapa Nui, and that they could project their supernatural powers to the new generations. This supernatural element seems to explain everything we have been seeing, but it is never that easy. In reality, these statues are gigantic, although on average they measure 4 meters and the smallest ones reach around 3. The Rapa Nui managed to build some specimens up to 10 meters high, while Squidward's house must measure about 30 centimeters. We know that real measurements have to be taken, because if SpongeBob is consistent in something, is that the vast majority of the objects that come from the surface retain their measurements, such as the pencil with which they draw Doodlebob in Season 2, or the same pineapple of SpongeBob. So Squidward's house simply cannot be one of the original heads, and another explanation must be sought. There is a very curious theory belonging to user My Brain is a Gramophone. He explains that the head cannot be an original moai, since beyond the size, these heads are not hollow. In fact, judging by its retro-style decor, the tapestry and all the refined stuff, the house was actually a decorative object, like some kind of very fancy martini shaker or ice bucket, something that could easily have been aboard a cruise ship passing by near Bikini Bottom. Which doesn't explain why she's alive, but it does explain everything else. At this point in the investigation, we already had to look everywhere possible, and we came across this image. It shows us Squidward's house at an early stage of its construction, and it comes from the Patrick Star Show. Which means that Squidward's house is not an object that fell from the surface by accident either, but was built from scratch in Bikini Bottom, which recontextualizes everything. So, after hours of despair, we had to turn to our last great resource, the SpongeBob comics, and it is here that we found the real solution to today's mystery. The problem is that the comic we are looking for is one of those that appeared in Nickelodeon magazine, so it is quite difficult to get hold of. Fortunately for us, there is a girl named Angela Simcoe who collected these stories and now uploads them recorded by a camera to her official channel, and it comes with voice acting, so I advise you to check out the original source. Titled House of Squidward, this story shows us Bob and Patrick looking for Squidward to play with them, but he says they better go find the surprise he hid in the backyard, obviously trying to get rid of his neighbors. This allows Squidward to enjoy some alone time, while Bob and Patrick search like crazy. Just as they were about to give up, Patrick finds something very hidden underground, a switch that has 2 words written on it, asleep and awake. Patrick activates the awake mode and Squidward's house starts to come to life and says awake. After all these years I am awake. After this, 2 wooden arms come out and begin to move towards the city. Squidward gets to chasing his house all over Bikini Bottom where he is wreaking havoc, and in the end it turns out that the house likes to blow bubbles, which they use to contain it a bit and then dress Bob's pineapple as a woman to distract the head and convince it to take its original place so they can flip the switch and go back to sleep. I think more than one may notice the similarities of this story with the Good Neighbors episode, being a very similar premise, but there is a big difference, and that is that the head proclaims that it has finally woken up after so long, this being the first time that the secret of the house is revealed. Which explains why Squidward had no idea that his house had a switch that woke it up, and means that the comic takes place before the events of the series and shows us how Squidward's house comes to life. That's why Patrick says in the secret box that Squidward's house can't know his secret either, because by this point in the story, they already know he's alive. It is also important to note that since its appearance in the comic, the house has had an evolution, as the next time it gets out of control in Good Neighbors, it is fitted with metal limbs so that it can move around effectively. Squidward already knew that his house had the potential to adapt to the house's security system, and all this product was going to do was give him more control over his head. The easiest thing to assume is that after it was activated the first time, it was never fully deactivated again, and the switch is doing nothing more than containing the house on 122 Conch Street, restricting its mobility but not actually shutting it down. In fact, it is possible that this is happening because the house has been destroyed and rebuilt many times, as they have had to modify the foundations more than once, ruining part of the switch system. Which means that the house is alive because it is a gigantic robot, built like a house but deactivated so as not to arouse suspicion. The only thing we still don't know is who the freak installed this system so that the house can come to life as if it were an artificial intelligence in the body of a mecha. We have seen several of these houses in Squidville, for example, and if they all had this mechanism, basically all the octopuses would be preparing to stage a coup with hundreds of mechas at their disposal. If just one caused so much trouble in Bikini Bottom, imagine an invasion with hundreds of these things. Rather, it's likely that other characters had a hand in it during the construction of Squidward's house. And all this makes me think of Plankton. There's a really cool theory that we've already mentioned that tells us that there's a robot invasion slowly taking over Bikini Bottom. And many of these inventions are coming from Plankton's hand. So not only are the marine inhabitants going to be robotized in the future, but their homes as well. And Squidward's house is one of the first. Plus, this could allow Plankton to always be on the lookout for any information about Mr. Krabs, since Squidward is one of Eugene's oldest and closest employees. Which leaves me wondering why Squidward's bathroom is also alive. Yeah, too much internet for today. So I hope you liked this video. Hit like if you did, subscribe for more videos like this, and remember Bikini Bottom will be overrun by robots and there's nothing we can do about it. Bye.